I'm Frederick. They told me this in a whisper. Now, you'll hear it. Enjoy watching. Harold woke up with a familiar sound. In his sleep, Rex had growled softly again, moving his paws, as if he were still making his way through the sand and blood of some distant dead front. It was a serene morning outside. The sky was clear, with rare stripes of clouds. The air already smelled of spring, but winter remained in Harold's body. He rose slowly from the bed, ran his hand over his grey stubble, cracking his knuckles. His heart was beating slowly, unevenly, as usual, but still confidently enough for him to pull on his old army vest, not as a symbol, as armor. Rex raised his head. His cloudy eyes glittered. They had the same look that young guys saw on bases in Afghanistan before flying out to the green zone. The dog was old, but steadfast. Harold smiled at him slightly, tiredly, and slowly attached a thin metal tag to his collar. Combat Dog, US Army, Iraq, Operation Phantom Fury. It was a ritual. Today, like every Tuesday, he went to the store for fresh bread, for a single loaf that they baked there the old-fashioned way, in an oven. It was his small victory over time. To walk, with Rex, slowly, through a still, slightly alien neighborhood that he had once defended from looters during a hurricane, and now defended himself from with his eyes through the blinds. They walked slowly, Harold leaning on his cane. An old army one, with a carved eagle handle that he had received after a mine explosion nearly cost him his leg. People passed by. Some nodded, some looked away. Most simply did not notice. Harold was used to it. Over the past few years, he had become part of the street background, like an old sign that no one takes down, but no one reads either. But the air was different today. He felt it when he was still standing on the street corner. A cold, tightening feeling, as if something was about to happen. Rex tensed up too. His ears twitched, his paws became quieter, his step became more even, as if he was returning to combat mode. Harold looked ahead. There were 200 meters left to the store, but there was already someone new standing at the entrance. Young, white, with an earpiece in his ear, wearing a security guard's uniform jacket. Nervous, with an aggressive posture. This guy was new. Harold knew all the guards by shift. And he knew right away. This one wouldn't recognize him. It wasn't a premonition. It was knowledge. Guys like this don't listen, they command. Guys like this don't ask for documents. They look for a reason. Harold kept walking, feeling something like the silence before a shot rising inside him. Rex walked next to him, slowly but stubbornly. He didn't lag behind his man even a step. At the entrance, the guard was already looking at them, and there was no polite wariness in his gaze. There was a hidden challenge in it, as if Harold had already violated something with his skin color, his gait, his right to be here. Rex froze at his master's foot. Harold nodded to the guard and reached into his pocket to show his dog tag. Not a military one, no, the one certifying his dog as a service dog. But the guard stepped forward and raised his hand. No dogs allowed. Rules. His voice was sharp, rough, not for conversation. Harold opened his mouth to explain, but the guard had already raised his tone. Didn't you hear? I said, no dogs allowed in here. People started turning around. Someone stopped. Harold felt the guard's face change. Not just irritation, but something personal, as if he had been waiting his whole life for the moment to put someone in their place. Harold quietly said, "This is a service dog. I have permission. I'm a veteran." He held out the tag. But the guard didn't even look. He chuckled. "Of course, veteran. You're all veterans now." The tone was mocking. The crowd began to swell. Rex growled low, almost inaudibly. Harold sighed. He knew how quickly this could get out of hand. He wanted to avoid conflict. He'd seen too much blood to look for more wounds. But the guard stepped closer. "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the cops, and don't think your dog can save you." There was more than arrogance in his voice. There was fury. Harold realized this wasn't about rules. This was about who you were, about the color of your skin, about how the world decided to see you. And in that moment, the air changed. People started filming with their phones. Some giggled. Some just watched. No one intervened. Rex tensed, ready to defend if necessary. Harold took a step back, and his chest pricked. A slight pain. Nothing new. He nodded at the dog as if to say, "Easy." But the guard yelled again, "Get out of here, old man, or I'll drag you out myself." His face was twisted, and in his shadow on the asphalt was not a man, but an animal. Rex growled louder. At that moment, for the first time in a long time, Harold felt like he was back at war. Only now the enemy was not a sniper. The enemy was in uniform, close by, with a name on his chest and hatred in his eyes. And it was just a store, and it was just bread. But the air was already ringing. Something was about to happen. And this day, this ordinary, familiar Tuesday, ceased to be ordinary the very moment Harold realized. This time, he might not be coming home. He saw him from afar. Harold was one of those people you couldn't miss when you were looking for someone to stop. An old man with a tired back, black skin, a worn army green windbreaker, a large German shepherd on a leash. No matter how much dignity there was in his walk, Jacob McNeil, a new generation of security guard, saw only a problem in such people, a problem that could ruin the statistics of incident prevention, a problem that could distract him from his phone, from the boring shift, from his sense of power, which he rarely felt outside these glass doors. He tightened his belt with a radio, adjusted the earpiece, and stepped closer to the entrance, already decided that this old man would not come in here. He saw this not as a situation, as a mission. The people in the line outside the supermarket had become accustomed to McNeil, smug, with an arrogant squint. He differed from the other guards in that he did not just follow the rules, he enjoyed them, and especially when he could put in their place someone who, in his opinion, did not deserve respect. And here was Harold, a veteran, a black man, with a dog, a full set of internal irritations that Jacob disguised as duty of service. He took a step forward, assertively, loudly, so that everyone could hear. "Hey! No dogs allowed!" People turned around. Harold stopped. He didn't even come close. He just raised his hand with the badge, silently, with respect, which was never returned to him. "This is a service dog. I'm a veteran. He's with me, and I have permission." His voice was quiet even, and this angered McNeil even more. He hated this tone. Calm, confident, not obsequious. "Are you deaf? I said no dogs allowed." The guard raised his voice, already feeling the familiar tingle of power. He did not look at the badge. He looked at the face, not like a man looking at a man, but like a judge looking at a violator. And there he saw not a veteran, but a threat, a potential thief, a homeless person, a man who could be pushed out the door without anyone saying a word. And everything that was happening fit into his usual dead pattern. If you are him, then you cannot be right. Harold still stood, calmly, but inside, the ice was beginning to rise. He had felt it many times. In the 60s, when he was spat upon returning from his first tour of duty at the train station. In the 80s, when he was rejected for a job because he had too much military experience. And now, in the 2020s, he stood again in front of a boy in uniform who saw him not as a soldier, but as a subordinate. Rex stepped closer to his leg. The dog felt the moment heating up. His fur stood on end, his eyes following the guard. More discipline in that look than Jacob's uniform. But Jacob didn't notice. He was already putting on a show. "Hey, you don't have the right to come in. Show me your papers. Prove you're a veteran." His voice was getting louder, more mocking. The crowd was already filming. People were smiling, whispering, and only one woman tried to intervene. "But he just wanted to buy bread." "Then let him go to another store," the guard snapped without turning around. Harold slowly put the badge back in his pocket, but his gaze didn't waver. "You didn't even look. All you saw was the color of his skin and a dog. I see a potential threat. I'm here to keep people like you out." "People like me? You get it. I'm calling the cops." Harold nodded slowly. He knew how this could end. He'd seen it on the news. He buried friends who had been wrongly detained. He whispered prayers under the sirens, because too often the truth wasn't enough to keep him alive. Rex growled again. The men backed away. Jacob reached for his radio, calling for the cops. He looked at Harold with that look that had once been the norm on the Jim Crow buses. As if to say out loud, "You are not a person here," and Harold knew it. Slowly, but surely, the cops arrived quickly, young, white, tired, and the first thing they did was not ask what was wrong. They walked up to the guard and nodded. One of them, the tall one, had his hand on his belt, near his gun. Harold stood still, as he had been trained. He spoke calmly. He showed his papers, his medals, his service dog certificate. But the cops' faces remained blank. The guard yelled again. He refused to leave. He made threats. The dog was aggressive. "Threatened?" the policeman asked. "Yes, he said that the dog can protect. The dog is trained to protect. He served in the army." Harold tried to interject, but the officer was already taking a step forward. The second one was holding handcuffs in his hands. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Are you serious? He's a veteran." But the policeman said, "Move away. Don't interfere," and grabbed Harold by the shoulder. He staggered. Rex barked. A moment, and everything became abrupt. One of the policemen jerked the old man sharply, twisting his arms behind his back, and he fell to one knee. Rex rushed forward, but did not bite. He simply blocked his master's body. His body was shaking, but he held on. Harold did not scream. He was no longer surprised. He simply looked at the asphalt which was already absorbing his years, his honor, his name. Fake arrest. That's what they'll call it later in the reports. Or they won't call it at all. But at that moment, it was all too real. His hands were burning from the metal. His heart was beating irregularly. The crowd was noisy. The woman with the phone was shouting, "He's got a badge! He's a veteran! He's a hero!" But the policeman silently put on the second clasp. "Resisting arrest," the guard muttered, smiling. And that smile had everything: power and contempt and joy at being superior. He looked at Harold the way you look at a broken thing. Not a person, a thing. Rex licked his owner's face, whining anxiously. "Get the dog away," someone shouted. "He's a service dog," someone from the crowd responded. But no one listened. The world was again divided into important and unnecessary. Harold lay face down in the dust, feeling his country spitting in his face again, but not by someone else's hands, by its own. And that was only the beginning. Let's take a short break. Write in the comments where you listen to our stories from. Have you or your loved ones had similar experiences of injustice, humiliation, or bias? Your stories are very important to us. We read every single one. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now so you don't miss the rest. And now we continue. Harold knew he wouldn't be allowed in before he even got to the door. He didn't feel it with his skin, but with his body, with his inner ear, with the instinct that comes from decades of living in a country where your dignity is easily negated by one look, one word, one, "You can't be here." He knew it when he took his first step toward the glass doors of the store, where the air suddenly grew heavier, like before a thunderstorm. Only this storm was not made of clouds but of human malice. Jacob McNeil stood with his hands on his hips, as if he were guarding the entrance not to a supermarket, but to the White House, and there was nothing in his gaze except cold, lazy contempt. He wasn't looking for a reason. He had already invented one, and it was on a leash, at Harold's foot. "No dogs allowed!" The voice, sharp, deliberately loud, broke out before Harold had time to reach the door. There was no "hello," no "excuse me," just an order, just a break. Harold stopped. He wasn't surprised. He simply nodded, pulled a thin, laminated tag from his breast pocket, and stepped forward. "This is a service dog. I'm a veteran. I have permission to enter public places." He spoke calmly, clearly, without aggression. He had been trained to behave, but Jacob didn't even look at the tag. It was as if he hadn't heard the words, or, more likely, he had heard them, but didn't believe a single one of them. "Didn't you hear what I said? Dogs." "No," he repeated, louder, drawing out the words, as if explaining the rules to a stupid child. Harold pulled Rex back slightly so as not to provoke him, and held out the tag again. "This isn't just a dog. He served. He was trained. He saved lives. And now you think he's going to pick and choose bread? Jacob chuckled, not moving. His voice became poisonous, mocking. He looked not at the badge, but at the face, and not at the person, but at the object. You will not pass. I told you in Russian. Rules for everyone. People began to stop. Someone turned around curiously. Someone was already taking out a phone. Harold stood rooted to the spot. He knew that this conversation was no longer about the dog, and not about the rules. This was about power, about one person's attempt to prove to another that he is inferior. Inferior in status, inferior in color, inferior simply because he is not him. You didn't even look at the badge, Harold said. You don't care that it's a service badge. You don't care that I'm a veteran. You just don't like the way I look. I don't like that you're lying, old man. Do you think everyone put tags on their dogs and can now climb wherever they want? I'm not lying. That's what you all say. Every second person is a veteran now. How can I check? Do you want me to take your word for it? No. I want you to look at the document. I don't have to. You're a security guard. It's your job to look at the documents, not to stir up a conflict. A conflict? The conflict started when you came up here with that dog. Harold heard someone in the crowd exhale. Someone muttered, "What a jerk." Someone started filming, but Jacob didn't seem to notice. He was enjoying the situation. For him, it was a show. He was the boss. He was the director. He chose who would be let in and who would be humiliated. "Get out, or I'll call the police," he finally said quietly, restrained, but with special emphasis, as if he were raising the final bet. Harold felt something squeeze inside. He took a step forward. Just one. Rex was left behind. "You have no right. By law, I can come in. You want to check? You want to wait for the cops? I'm not afraid of the police. You should." The tension was almost palpable at that moment. It hung between them like a taut string. Jacob's breathing quickened. He waited. He wanted Harold to move, so he could grab him, so he could give him a reason, so he could show everyone, look, these guys always have pretensions, but inside they're the same. He wanted to push, and Harold understood it. He'd seen eyes like that at bases, at mercenaries, at those who love force but don't know how to respect. He took a step back, not in defeat, but in wisdom. But the crowd was already seething. One guy, about 20 years old, shouted, "Hey man, are you serious? That's a veteran. I know him. He marched in the parade, with that dog." "You don't work here," Jacob snapped. "Go your own way." "But he's a hero. A hero. In our country, everyone is a hero when it's profitable. And then they beg for discounts and climb with dogs where they shouldn't." "You'd piss your pants if you were where he was," someone else shouted. But Jacob continued to stand unwavering. He knew that as long as he was in uniform, as long as he had a radio and the entrance was under his control, he was superior. And at that moment, when dozens of eyes were looking at Harold and the poison of other people's words was cutting into his ears, he suddenly realized that he was returning not just to his youth, but to an era he considered outlived. When people were led with signs saying, "I am a man," and still weren't let in. When your history meant nothing if your skin was wrong. He stood, and Rex took another step forward, stood to the side, as he had been trained, covering the flank, ready for a command. But the command did not sound. Harold was no longer a soldier. He was an old man, robbed of his bread, his respect, and his right to be who he had become. He felt the pressure rising. His chest grew heavy. He took a step to leave, to save face. But Jacob shouted at his back, "Go tell the others. No one is waiting for you here." There was a grin in the voice. Pleasure. Victory. The crowd began to roar. Someone was shouting, someone was indignant, but Harold could no longer hear. Everything merged into a hum. He walked slowly, feeling Rex tense next to him, his shadow longer than usual, his heart beating uncertainly, but in rhythm with each humiliation, with each word that hit him like a whip. And all he wanted was just bread, just the right to be, but even that was out of reach. And in this world, full of shop windows, discounts and fake smiles, it turned out that the memory of the service, of the victims, of the bullets from which he saved others, is not worth even a couple of words. Sorry, go ahead. And that day, Harold took with him not only shame, he took with him something that will never return. Faith that someone could still stand up for him, but someone will stand up for him. And not a person. The crowd began to gather, as it always does when someone is shouting and someone is silent, when one is humiliating and another is holding back, as if he still believes that in this country, on this street, under this sky, dignity is possible if you just endure it a little longer. Harold stood at the entrance, motionless, with Rex at his foot. And at that moment, the whole world shrank to a circle of glass doors, faces in the windows, and the gaze of the guard who suddenly decided that he was the judge for the day. Jacob McNeil did not just feel power, he absorbed it. With each passing second, his voice grew louder, his intonation more insolent, his posture wider. He was no longer talking, he was performing. I told you clearly, you can't bring a dog in here. The word dog sounded over and over again, and each time there was a little more malice in it than the last. Don't you get it? You think just because you tag a dog you can go anywhere? This isn't the army. This is a store. There are different rules. He stepped closer, so close that Harold could smell the cheap deodorant and the remains of the gum he chewed to mask his cigarettes. Rex moved, but he didn't growl. He was trained. He felt the tension, but he waited for the command. He was better than all of them, because he was taught to respect. Old black storyteller, Jacob said, looking straight into Harold's face, so that everyone could hear, so that no one would be mistaken about who exactly the finger was about to be pointed at. Someone in the crowd giggled. Someone looked away. And someone took out a phone and started filming, like people film fires, accidents, fights, for likes, for content, not for justice. He's probably a tramp. I've seen those. They sleep at the train station, and then they come with a dog and shout that they are heroes, Jacob continued. And his voice was no longer just aggressive, but almost joyful. He was enjoying the humiliation, like a gourmet enjoying a tasting. Harold stood, not moving. Only his hand was shaking, old, with healed burns, with veins like dry branches. He did not lift it, not because he could not, but because he knew that if he did, someone would misunderstand. Such are the times now. Your gestures are interpreted against you. He tried to speak, but he could not. The words were stuck somewhere between his throat and his heart, and Rex tensed. His gaze moved from the guard to Harold's hand, and back. He knew. If his hand was shaking, it meant something was wrong. It meant a threat. Why are you standing there? Do you think that if you are silent, you are right? Jacob continued, taking a step around like a predator. A hero, huh? Where are your medals? Where is your uniform? Where are the medals? Or did you pawn them too? Another laugh from the crowd. But this time someone quietly said, "You're going too far." "Shut up," Jacob snapped. "I'm cleaning up here. This is my shift, and I won't allow people like you to come in here with their dogs and war stories." He looked at Harold again, as if he expected him to explode. But Harold was still standing. His heart was beating irregularly. His head was buzzing. He saw faces, so many faces, indifferent, unconcerned, or on the contrary, with interest. He felt humiliation enveloping him, like a sticky smog that was impossible to shake off. He wanted to leave, but his legs did not move, because he knew if he left now, he would lose not to himself, but to them. To those who think that they can wipe their feet on memory, to those who don't understand that behind them stand the ghosts of their fallen comrades, their names carved in stone, and the dog that pulled 3 of them from a burning armored car. "Say something, old man," Jacob shouted. "Or did the dog stuff your mouth shut?" Someone in the crowd laughed, loudly, angrily. Harold looked at them. He didn't hate them. He just didn't understand how anyone could give up their humanity so easily. He wanted them to feel, even for a second, what it was like to stand there humiliated, your voice unheard. But he knew they wouldn't understand. "You're humiliating me in front of everyone," he said quietly. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've done for this country. You don't know who you're standing in front of. I know exactly as much as I see, and all I see is an old man with a dog, no evidence, and an insolent mug. I'm not insolent. I'm just tired of being silent. Well, shut up and go away. And at that moment the crowd began to roar, louder, more indignant. Someone was shouting, "You're overreacting." Someone was shouting, "He's right, he's a veteran." But Jacob wasn't listening. He was drunk on power, on the audience, on the feeling that everything he said was louder than the truth, and he went all the way. You're nothing, you're nobody. You're just an old black man with a dog who someone once gave something to by mistake. And now you think you can walk around here like you're important, but you're nobody. Harold felt something tearing inside him. Not anger, not pain, but respect for the world in which he had tried so long to remain human. He looked at Rex. The dog sat motionless, but his body was shaking. He knew something was wrong. He felt what people didn't want to see. Harold wanted to say something else, but his tongue went soft. He knew he couldn't stand it any longer. Not because he had given up, but because his body couldn't take it. He took a step back. And again, as if to finish him off, Jacob shouted, "Get out of here before we put you on a leash next to our dog." And at that moment, the world froze. Everyone was silent, even those who were filming, even those who were laughing. Because there was no longer any racism in those words. There was pure animal hatred in them. Harold didn't answer. He just looked, not at Jacob, but toward the entrance, toward the bread. He knew he wouldn't get it today. But he also knew something else. This wasn't the end, because somewhere, in this same city, someone else would hear, and they wouldn't remain silent. As Harold slowly backed away from the entrance, carrying the shadows of others' gazes and the weight of humiliation, the memory shot into his head suddenly, like a misfire of time, like that same smell turning on again, the smell of hot sand, diesel, dust soaked with blood, and screams that no one listened to. He was not just remembering, he was returning to where everything was simpler and more terrible at the same time. Iraq, Palm Valley, 30 miles south of Fallujah. Rex was only a year old then, a puppy by appearance, a machine by training. He was transferred from another base after he found 4 caches in a row and pulled a wounded man from under a collapsed concrete span. Harold, then still a Sergeant Wallace, did not immediately believe the stories. But when he saw how the dog calmly walked alongside under fire, without looking back, without being distracted, only checking every inch of sand, he realized, this is not just a dog, this is a soldier. And even more, in that hell, where it was unclear where the next death would come from, Rex was an anchor. He was the meaning, and he also didn't discriminate. He didn't care if you were black or white, northern or southern, rich or poor. He only saw the one with him. And so, when Harold first heard one of the young fighters say behind his back, "A black commander with a dog is a typical set," he didn't respond. He simply stroked Rex silently. But that was the beginning. In war, oddly enough, racism never dies. It hides under armor, under a uniform, under a common enemy. But as soon as you relax, it crawls out like a rat from a crack. Harold knew that he was not liked at headquarters. He was one of the few blacks who commanded a group with a K9, who passed the selection, passed the tests, did not break. It infuriated him. One of the officers once said at a briefing, "We have equal opportunities here, but I'd prefer to see the dogs trained by people who look like traditional Americans." The laughter around the table was short. Harold didn't laugh. He knew that if he lost his temper even once, that would be it. One of his colleagues once spat next to him and said, "You act like you're one of us." Harold stood up without a word and went off to training. And then, 2 days later, it was he and Rex who defused a bomb right on the highway along which the general's convoy was supposed to pass. After that, they began to greet him, without a smile, but restrained. Respect came not through equality, through fear, through facts that could not be ignored. And then there was that day. Patrol, dusty road. The sun beat on helmets like a hammer. Rex suddenly growled and froze. Harold immediately knew that something was wrong. He signaled to stop. The mechanic, a white guy from Ohio, chuckled, "Oh, come on, your dog just wanted to pee." A second later, It detonated. Everyone nearby was scattered. Harold woke up covered in blood. His face was covered in blood. His ear was buzzing. Rex was above him, scratched but alive. He was tugging at his vest, dragging him out from under the rubble. Then Harold realized the dog itself had thrown some of the debris off him. The next day, there were only 2 survivors from the group, he and Rex, and then they put him in a photo with the commander, for the record, not for the award, for the picture. They didn't invite him to the award ceremony. They said, "We'll mail the medal. It doesn't matter to you guys anyway." He kept the medal not because it meant anything, but because it was a reminder of how the dog saved him when people were trying to forget him. Rex didn't ask who he was, where he came from, what he was claiming. He was just doing his thing. They slept together. They ate together. They went into battle together. One day, a mortar shell exploded over their base. Everyone hid. Rex jumped on Harold and pinned him to the ground. Even when everything went quiet, he didn't back down until the all-clear signal came. This wasn't training. This was loyalty. True, animal loyalty. Inhuman, because people can't do that. And then demobilization came. Rex had to be put to sleep. That was the protocol. Harold wouldn't let it. He filed 18 reports, went through 3 commissions, paid his savings to prove that he wasn't just a dog. He was a comrade in arms. He was part of his body, his heart. In the end, they were allowed to stay together, with the note, temporary. And now, years later, he's standing at the entrance to a store, where a boy with a walkie-talkie is yelling at him that his dog is a dog, and he himself is a teller. And everything that happened then, in Iraq, flashes before his eyes again. Not for pity, not for memories, but because today's insults strike at wounds that never healed. He didn't ask for respect. He asked for bread. But apparently, in this country, bread is still too expensive for a dog that saved dozens and for its owner who survived war and racism. And Harold is silent again, because he's already heard the bullets. But that laughter, those words, they hit deeper. Let's take a short break. Write in the comments where you listen to our stories from. Have you ever experienced injustice or bias? Your experience matters. Subscribe if you want to support our stories and not miss the next chapters. And now we continue. The crowd wouldn't leave Harold alone. It seemed like every look, every whisper was forged with one purpose: to make him feel alienated, insignificant. People stood by, not interfering, but each of them had already chosen a side. Some supported the guard, some shook their heads in respect, and some simply filmed on their phones. There weren't many of them, but they were there. They were all on the same side, against the old black veteran with the dog who hadn't given up, who was still standing in response to the humiliation and the words about how he deserved nothing. Jacob McNeil kept shouting. He was in his element, hurt and smug. "What are you standing there for, old man? Do you even know where you are?" His voice was full of fury, as if Harold's very existence was a personal insult. He stopped and raged, drawing out the words so that everyone could hear. "You came here with a dog, and now you want to be pitied? Serves you right. Get out of here before it's too late!" He stepped forward, deliberately ignoring Harold's step back. He was sure that no one would dare intervene. He was sure that he had won. The crowd, like him, lived in a world where one category of people was superior to another. And this old man with a dog was just an ancient relic for them, as McNeil said, an old black man with a trick. People began to laugh, quietly at first, then louder. Someone spoke up. "This is kind of funny, right?" Someone else interjected, "Like he's a superhero?" Another man said with a smile, "Most likely this dog is the only thing he ever raised, ha." Harold knew that he must not react. He knew that if he showed weakness, it would be the final defeat. But in those moments, when every new attack sounded like another punch in the face, even his iron self-control began to tremble. He felt how his internal pain, accumulated over the years, was beginning to break through to the surface. He couldn't stop it. It was too much, and he was tired of being silent, tired of being patient. His hand trembled again, and he almost clenched it into a fist. Rex was tense too. The dog felt it. his master's tension, his indecision, his weakness in the eyes of the crowd, and he reacted instantly. His tail remained tucked between his legs, and his body became tense, like a spring. Rex felt that Harold was on the edge. He felt that his master was closer to the edge than ever. But he didn't know how to help. He was just a dog. He could protect, he could bark, he could bite, but what to do with what is not visible? What to do with what lies below the surface? What to do with that look of prejudice, that laughter, those words that insulted not only Harold but himself? The guard saw that people were reacting. He felt that his words were echoing, that he was the center of attention now. This was his time, his moment, and he was ready to play it to the fullest. He continued to spew insults as if they were part of his ritual. "You can't even stand up, old man. What do you expect? To walk the streets with dogs and puppies and think that everyone owes you?" He took another step forward. Harold felt his heart beat faster. He couldn't stop the trembling that was now not only in his hands but in his voice. He didn't want it to be like this, but he felt that he couldn't take another blow. And just as the guard came too close, Harold raised his hand and said, almost in a whisper, "I didn't do anything to you. I just want to get through." He wasn't talking to the guard. He was talking to the crowd, to all the people standing there, silent. He was talking to everyone standing there, thinking, "It's none of my business." He knew it wouldn't do any good, but he had to say it. And then the crowd went still. Everything went quiet, but only for a second. Jacob McNeil couldn't let that moment go unanswered. "You think anyone here feels sorry for you?" He chuckled, his gaze sweeping over everyone in the room. "You're wrong. I don't feel sorry for you, man. I just want you to understand that no one here is going to give you any respect or any place. You're a nobody. You're nothing." More laughter. That laughter was bone-chilling. All those people were laughing. One man in the corner of the crowd said again, "He can't even stand up." Harold saw the laughter pouring into his face, the way every look grew heavy, the way those who once might have intervened, who might have said something, grew cold and empty. But they didn't speak. They were part of this crowd. They were part of this scene. "Get out, old man! Don't come in if you don't want to!" one of the men shouted, grabbing a stone from the ground and throwing it at Harold. It wasn't aimed at him, but it was close enough to make the dog growl for a moment. There was that same fire in his eyes that had once burned in Grozny, in Damascus, in Kandahar. He was ready to protect. But his master didn't want that. He knew that if this moment turned into a fight, nothing would help. And he looked at Rex again. He felt his hand shaking again. He felt his heart torn between anger and silence again. But he couldn't break. He knew he couldn't. Even if the whole world now looked at him as a nobody, he couldn't afford to be who they wanted him to be. Harold looked at the crowd. He saw one of them open his mouth, ready to deliver another insult, and in that moment, he knew they wouldn't believe him. He could stand there, keep quiet, try to say something, but they wouldn't listen. He knew that in their eyes, he would always be just an old black storyteller with a dog. And that was the most humiliating thing. No matter what he did, they would always see him through that filter. He knew there was a way to fight it, but not here. Not with them. He turned slowly and walked away, without looking back, without saying a word. And maybe that was the greatest humiliation, because they expected him to fall. They expected him to break. But he walked away, not because he was weak, but because he knew there was no room for victory here. That moment when victory was simply surviving. And Harold walked forward, knowing that he was not alone. Rex was with him. He had always been with him. And that was all they needed. And that was all they could take from this world. The police arrived quickly, as they usually do when it comes to someone who looks out of place. When loud shouting in the street, disturbing the peace, is the order of the day. It was the same as always, a familiar situation, a familiar face. The same white policeman, the same patrol cars with their lights flashing as if in response to any signal of disorder. On the surface, it looked like a routine incident, because what could you expect from an old man with a dog if not a disturbance? But in this case, everything was different. This was not a simple intervention to regulate the situation. This was an intervention that, as always, turned everything upside down. A foggy atmosphere was gathering around them. The crowd, unhappy with the silence, unhappy with Harold's departure, was now turning around. But no one was intervening. These were the same people who had just been laughing, who were perhaps trying to say that everything was unfair, but nothing more. The officers stepped out of their patrol cars with their usual wariness, asking no questions, simply approaching the guard. They didn't see a person in the black veteran with the dog. They saw trouble. It was a sign they all knew, even if they didn't realize it. Harold stood there, feeling that cold heaviness in his chest again. Rex stood there, waiting for the team, ready to protect as always. But it was too late. They weren't going to deal with what was happening. They were here to finish the job. One of the officers, a tall man with sunglasses and a tight-fitting helmet, walked up to the guard, said nothing, and nodded. And in that moment, Harold knew the decision had been made before they'd even arrived. This wasn't an accident. It was part of a plan. They didn't care who he was, didn't care why he was there. It was his status, the way he walked, the color of his skin, his life. None of it mattered anymore. All of this was the first step to getting him out. The officer walked up to Harold and, without greeting him, said coldly, "Get out of here. I don't know what's going on here, but I'm not going to wait." His tone was lifeless, but there was a familiar threat in it, ready to squeeze his cuffed hands. Harold didn't move. He didn't even answer. He stood there silently, feeling his face burn with resentment, with bitterness, with all this injustice. He felt everything in the air shrinking, and his heart beating twice as hard, as if it was trying to break out of his chest so as not to be part of this obscurantism. Rex was still sitting next to him, but he knew too. Now his master was no longer a soldier. He was just another target. "What's the problem?" The officer bowed his head slightly as the guard pointed at Harold, at his dog. He didn't even look at the papers Harold handed him. His gaze was focused not on what he could understand, but on what he knew. A man with a dog, with dark skin, could not be good. They didn't want to look at him anyway. They just didn't want to. It was obvious. They didn't pay attention to his medals, didn't care who he was or where he had been, didn't notice the badge he showed the guard. The police continued to practice their actions according to the script they had learned long ago. This man is not us. He is not like us, and therefore he is guilty. One of the officers, leaning slightly, said, "Well, old man, are you going to tell your story now? Or are you ready to finish it right here?" The words sounded like a sentence. Not a question, not a request. A sentence. Harold had no answer. He did not have the strength to answer. He just said nothing. He already knew that any words would be perceived as an excuse for those who would decide that he should have left and never returned. At that moment, Rex, sensing that Harold was about to fall, slowly stood up, walked forward and barked. It wasn't just a bark, it was a challenge. He was ready to defend his master. And at that moment, the officers froze. They looked at the dog, but their gaze was not wary. It was the gaze of people accustomed to the fact that their decisions were always right. "If you don't go, I'll call for backup," one of them said, with irritation in his voice. He wanted to show that he was not afraid of the old man and his dog. Harold looked at him. It was a look full of pain and emptiness. He realized that he was not destined to get justice. He realized that he might never be able to prove his case because his truth was no longer important. This was not just a mistake. It was a system that simply stopped caring about people. At that moment, despite the fatigue, despite the horror that was seething in his chest, Harold stood up. Slowly but surely. He didn't know what would happen next, but he could no longer afford to stand here like an object, like a toy for those who decided what to do with him. And even if all the remaining stereotypes and injustices of the world were going against him, he knew he was not alone. Rex was with him. That was all that was left for him. The moment the officers started moving forward, Harold made up his mind. He didn't want to fight the police. He didn't want another war, but he could no longer be the one being silenced. He stood up. "I'll go with you," he said. Those were his last words, and although they sounded like agreement, there was a hidden determination in his voice. He knew what would happen to him. but he couldn't let them see how much they broke him. He would not be broken by this situation. Not now. Not at this moment. It happened not like a blow, but like a quiet, almost gentle collapse, as if a string had snapped inside Harold, taut for too long. He took one step, then a second, but the third was difficult. His legs weakened, and a sharp pain pierced his chest, as if something inside had suddenly lit up and then gone out. His heart, tired, clenched, uneven, could no longer cope. He felt the world around him become brighter, as if someone had turned the brightness up to the limit and then abruptly turned it off. The world lost focus. He slowly sank, first to one knee, then to both. His right hand reached to his chest, trying to grab not air, but salvation. The crowd froze, like a pack of predators caught in the roar of a thunderstorm. Rex howled. It was not a bark, it was a scream. A howl so drawn out that it was as if not a dog but a man groaned in despair. He rushed to his master, nuzzled his chest with his muzzle, lay down next to him, pressing his body against his, as if he could warm him, protect him, bring him back to life. The policemen recoiled, not from fear, but from surprise. One of them shouted into the radio, "We need an ambulance! Now! He's losing consciousness!" But there was no sincerity in his voice. It was official, dry, like protocol. Jacob McNeil stood motionless. He looked at Harold as if he couldn't believe things had gone this far. Something like fear flashed in his eyes, but it was immediately replaced by irritation. "Well, here we go. The show," he muttered, but in a different tone. A woman nearby screamed, "He's dying! Call an ambulance! Now!" Her voice trembled. There was too much panic in it to go unnoticed. People began to stir. Someone ran closer. Someone continued filming. But now, silently, without malice. Harold's falling figure, his cowering body, the dog covering him. All this was not a show. It became real. This was no longer a story about a homeless man with a dog, about a dreamer, as the guard called him. It became a moment in which all the noise of the street fell silent for a second. Harold did not speak. His eyes were open, but already clouded, covered with a veil. He saw, but no longer understood. He heard, but did not distinguish. He felt Rex next to him, like the weight of a body, like a smell, like the last real warmth on this earth. Rex licked his cheek, breathing heavily, as if he was also tired, as if he understood that this was it. Everything that could not be changed. The ambulance arrived quickly, but time no longer belonged to people. Paramedics jumped out, pushing aside the crowd. Someone shouted, "Move aside! Let me pass!" One of them dropped to one knee and started checking his pulse. The other was already preparing the defibrillator. But everything was visible at first glance. The man who stood, despite the humiliation, could not stand it. The heart that beat in time with the shots and Rex's growls in the war could not stand it in the silence of humiliation on the American street. The fall was not from a bullet. It was the fall of a star that no one saw, except for one dog, his dog. The ambulance took Harold away, not asking people any questions. It all happened so quickly, and at the same time, it seemed infinitely long. He left without regaining consciousness. Rex tried to run after the car, but they stopped him. The dog was breaking free, did not want to let go. It was not instinct, it was knowledge. He knew that their paths might never connect again. He felt it in his gut, like he felt mines under the sand. The police, the guard, passers-by. Now no one knew how to behave. They scattered like a flock of crows after thunder. Jacob stood there, still holding the walkie-talkie, no longer so confident, no longer so important. He knew the cameras had caught it all. He knew people were saying he had gone too far. But that wasn't the worst thing. What was worse was that for the first time, he felt like he had gone further than he had intended. Not because he felt sorry. No, but because now it could reach his superiors, the press, the court, but not his conscience. His conscience had long been drowned in complacency. Rumors had been circulating in the city that evening. The video had spread across social media. The footage of the old man falling, the dog howling, the security guard standing stone-faced. All of it was commented on, reposted, discussed. Someone said, "Serves him right. He should know where to go. Someone wrote, "He's a veteran, how could you?" But the screen doesn't feel pain. Likes don't cure heart attacks. Internet outrage is no substitute for sympathy on the street, and Rex sat at the entrance to the hospital. He didn't eat. He didn't drink. He just sat there. They couldn't take him away. He howled at night. The nurses said it was like he was calling for someone. They didn't know who, but he was calling for the one who was his person, the one who always held him close. Harold was in intensive care. He never woke up. They tried to restart his heart over and over, but his soul had gone back then. When his face first fell into the dust and he realized he no longer meant anything in the eyes of his country, it wasn't just a death, it was the dying of hope. Hope that justice was possible. He didn't live to see the morning news, but his story was just beginning. Let's take a short break. Write in the comments where you listen to our stories from. Have you ever encountered similar situations in life? Your thoughts and experiences are very important to us. Subscribe if you are interested in such stories, and do not want to miss the continuation. And now we continue. When Harold left for the hospital, everything in the neighborhood began to move, like wheels finally moving after a long standstill. But they weren't moving to help. They were moving to satisfy their own ambitions, to confirm their own preconceived notions. The collision of two worlds, as often happens, was quick and unexpected, but the consequences remained in the air. It wasn't just an event. It was a reminder that there was still much intolerable injustice in society. Many couldn't understand what had happened. Even among those who saw what had actually happened, there were many who chose to close their eyes. Everyone had already seen and heard it. It was all on video. And that video wasn't just Harold's fall. That video had it all. His male pride, his endless patience, his invisible inner scream, and laughter, the laughter of the crowd, which could not be any excuse. Those who filmed it didn't think it would be remembered as anything more. They thought it was just a scene, just events happening in their everyday lives. But they were wrong. It wasn't easy for everyone. They couldn't understand how quickly their opinion of a person, of him, of what was happening around them could change. They didn't know how painful it was to realize that you had become part of something so evil and heartless. After reading the comments online, watching the video, the woman who tried to intervene realized that everything was far from what she had imagined. She didn't want to intervene. She didn't want to be an activist, but she couldn't just watch what was happening. She lived in this area. She walked these streets, and now it had all become too close. She, like everyone else, heard the laughter, heard the insults, heard people saying that Harold was to blame for himself, that he had brought this on himself. She walked down the street. Everything in her head was jumbled. She couldn't wrap her head around what people thought, but she'd seen the video. She'd seen the crowd's reaction. It wasn't his fault. She wanted to understand what had really happened. She remembered him talking about his service, how his dog had saved lives. She'd never been able to understand what it was like, but now she was starting to feel like Harold was right. She felt the racism creeping into her, like a living reality she'd never noticed before. The woman walked out of the store and walked toward the people who weren't interfering, just watching. The people filming were laughing, making comments. She wasn't trying to fight, but she walked up to them, and their looks changed. Some looked away, some backed away. Some looked awkward, but there were also plenty who just stood there and watched, as if nothing had happened. She looked at them, ignoring the look the security guard gave her, and said, "How could you?" Her voice was loud, echoing in the empty, silent crowd. They didn't answer. She walked towards them, realizing that she couldn't remain silent any longer. She remembered her upbringing, her principles. In that moment, standing next to those who had witnessed Harold's humiliation, she felt that she had no choice but to intervene. She felt something breaking inside her. Not her life, not her morals, but her world. Everything around her was distorted. She couldn't leave it like that. She approached one of the men who was standing and giggling. She said to him, "What's so funny to you?" And her words sounded unexpected. The question was not just rhetorical, but angry and direct. The man immediately fell silent. He moved away, and his face turned red. He couldn't answer because he realized that he was no longer part of something normal. He found himself in the center of his own isolation. She stood in front of him like the last barrier against a wall of disrespect and malice. But not everyone reacted that way. The guard continued to stand there like a rock, his face set in stone. He knew that this would not be easy. He knew that his face would be on screens now, that his actions would be discussed. He felt how easily he had become perceived as a threat, as irrelevant, as a figure who no longer had the right to be the center of attention. He didn't want that. He just wanted everything to go back to normal, for his role as a guard to remain unchanged, and for no one to ask unnecessary questions. But the woman continued to stand in front of him. She still looked into his eyes, demanding an explanation, understanding that everything around her was too cruel to just leave. The guard was silent. She understood. He was not ready for more. He was part of the system, part of this hatred, but she did not stop. Her voice grew stronger. You stood there and said nothing when this man fell. You did not intervene. None of you intervened. How will you look yourselves in the eye now? The man could not answer. He lowered his head. The others didn't answer either. All she heard was silence, empty and uncertain. She walked toward the street without looking back. She felt the air change, but she already knew it wasn't enough. The expectations were still there, but now she saw that something had changed in some people's eyes. They weren't ready to admit it, but not today, not at this moment. She turned around only when she reached the edge of the sidewalk. There were a few more people standing there, a few passers-by who knew that the right way wasn't always the most convenient. She saw a man stop and say to her, "You're right." He was old. He was alone. But there was no malice in his eyes. He wasn't part of the crowd. He was himself. And she realized this was more than just help. It was recognition. It was recognition that those who remained silent could not be right. The morning began with headlines. Veteran with war dog hospitalized after supermarket row. Elderly black man collapses after altercation with security guard. Police did nothing. Service dog howled outside hospital. All the news was decorated with footage taken on phones, short, choppy, but too vivid to be ignored. People argued on social media. Some called Harold an old provocateur, others a living legend who was driven to faint. But the main thing was that it could no longer be hidden. Harold's name surfaced in a publication by an independent journalist, the same one who had been shouting in the crowd yesterday, demanding an ambulance. She remembered. 2 years ago, she interviewed him, a story about war dogs who served with American soldiers. Then Harold spoke simply, quietly, without pathos. He did not complain. He did not demand recognition. He simply told how Rex saved lives, how he warned about explosions, how he carried the wounded, how he helped people survive when they were already on the brink. He had medals. Rex did too. He had an archive in which he kept photos with commanders, letters of gratitude, even a clip from a ceremony where his name was mentioned next to the names of real heroes. He did not exhibit it. He did not put it on display. He simply lived. And now all of this has surfaced because the truth could no longer be silent. When the journalist published the full article, with the name, with the video, with the documents, with the photos, everything changed. People started writing, "We knew him. He was at our school telling the children about the war. He saved my brother. He helped the veterans." And all this, at the same time, an avalanche. But while memorials were being built on the internet, in real life, everything remained the same. Security guard Jacob McNeil was sitting in the office of the supermarket manager. His face turned pale. In front of him lay a printed report, screenshots from social networks, a request from the police. The management could no longer protect him. Not because they were ashamed. No, but because the threat of a scandal had become stronger than corporate loyalty. "Do you realize what you've done?" asked the manager, a man in an expensive jacket with a sweaty forehead. He was a hero, not some tramp, a real veteran. And now it's everywhere. "I didn't know," Jacob muttered, clenching his teeth. He didn't say, he looked. What? like a black man with a dog. Was that enough for you? I thought he was just... Exactly. You thought, and you shouldn't have thought about how to fire him, but about who you were talking to. He was suspended, without shouting, without emotion, just removed from his post. But his name was already in the headlines. And now everyone who was in that video, who laughed, who filmed, who kept silent, they also started getting questions. Were you there? Why didn't you stop? Why didn't anyone help? But these questions weren't coming from guilt, from reputation. People were defending themselves. And the louder the truth sounded, the more there were who tried to erase yesterday. But it was too late, because the truth was already an integral part of the street. The police issued a terse statement. We are conducting an internal investigation. When they arrived, the officers were acting according to instructions. But the instructions didn't explain why no one looked at the badge, why no one saw the documents, why a man who had been through blood and fire was spat at in response. And in the hospital, Harold lay unconscious. Journalists came to him. Activists came to him. Nurses brought him letters, postcards from school children, thank you notes, even old photographs of him standing in uniform next to Rex, smiling, alive. His face didn't move. Only the heart rhythm machine let us know he was still with us. Rex was still sitting by the door. He wouldn't move. They tried to take him away, but he struggled. They tried to feed him, but he wouldn't eat. He just waited. And the whole staff knew his howl at night now. He didn't whine. He called. He waited to be called back. And one evening, a general showed up at the hospital. The same one who had once commanded Harold's unit. He stood by the bed, his cap removed, and couldn't say a word. He knew. He remembered. He read the reports. He saw this man pull 6 soldiers out of the line of fire. He saw his dog risk himself pulling out a wounded man. He remembered. You saved my son. But now Harold couldn't hear. The hospital was quiet. Even the staff walked slowly, trying not to make any noise. Everyone knew. In one of the wards, a man was dying, forgotten by the country. Until it was too late. Racism didn't disappear. It just froze. But the truth, having burst out, became stronger than those who tried to suppress it. Because now everyone who passed by the door of the ward stopped. Because now even those who used to laugh wrote in the comments, sorry. But Harold was not there to forgive. He was no longer in this world where justice comes after a fall. His truth remained. In the dog, in the reports, in the memory. And society, turning to the mirror, saw its reflection for the first time. Not a hero, but the one who broke this hero. And all that remained was shame. Let's take a short break. Write in the comments where you listen to our stories from. Have you ever encountered situations of injustice or bias? Your thoughts and experiences are important to us. Subscribe if you are interested in such stories and do not want to miss the continuation. And now we continue. All the pain that had been building up over the years rolled in like a quiet wave. Nothing in this world seemed important until the moment came when you realized that you had lost not only yourself, but your entire life. The memory of those you had saved, of those who had looked into your eyes and trusted you, could not console you. The flash of rage that had burned inside Harold disappeared as soon as he felt something break in his chest. He had not been prepared for this. The doctor had not given him hope. Very weak heart, multiple arrhythmias. It cannot withstand such a load. But what struck him most was how quickly everyone began to tire, how quickly people forgot what was happening. Both those who laughed and those who remained silent. They all now seemed to have forgotten that they were part of this. It was too late for understanding, too late for the realization that the world around him had not been fair for a long time. And that one death, even if not physical, but mental, became more than just another story. The next morning, the press came to the hospital. They came again with microphones, with cameras, with questions that were no longer in the interests of the truth. Their faces were artificial. Their looks tried to hide greed. They did not see tragedy in this. They saw sensation. Everyone who approached the door of the ward did not look at a person. They looked at their future hero for an article. They did not care who Harold was. For them, he had become just a symbol. He was part of a story that could be presented in such a way as to show how wrong those who treated him were. But no one talked about the main thing. They did not explain what happened that day when Harold tried to simply enter the store, when his life and the life of his dog were trampled like dirt under fingernails, when he was reminded for the first time that he was nobody, that his fight for justice was worth nothing. And now, as he lay dying, one way or another, and the world began to ask questions, it was too late to make things right. They quickly found those who wanted to be heroes in the midst of someone else's pain. The press pounded on the hospital doors, demanding interviews with the nurses, demanding explanations from the doctors. But the truth slipped through their fingers. Rex sat next to him motionless. He knew that Harold was far from this world. He knew that his master would never hear applause, feel gratitude, see recognition. All he could do was stay close. Just be the one who had once saved, supported, pulled him out of the fire, who had remained strong when the world demanded weakness. Harold was broken. He was the living dead, and Rex knew it. But when they took him away for another checkup, he followed, as he always did. He was more than just a dog. He was someone who truly understood. Meanwhile, the internet, the media, and the streets became an arena for those trying to interpret the situation to their own angle. As always, racism manifested itself in the most subtle forms. This was not overtly aggressive racism. It was subtle, petty racism. The comments to the articles discussed how many people had to go through this so that the youth would understand that it is wrong to do this. The opposition was not justified from a position of justice. It was based on the position that the old people should no longer be outraged, that the psychology of blacks is a problem of the people themselves, not the system. And anyone who tried to speak out for Harold began to receive silent and loud threats, reducing these concerns to a stupid stereotype. We have no place for people like this. Soon, Harold's name became not only a symbol of injustice, but also a target for those who still could not believe that the country could fall so low. The police issued another statement saying that not all of the officers' actions were optimal, but that no human rights violations were recorded. And McNeil, the guard who had been quickly transferred, was given a disciplinary order. But few noticed that this was just a coughing match to the problem. And so it would have continued, if not for the moment when, during the night shift, one of the channels showed the very recording that everyone was trying to hide. When it surfaced on television, at the moment when thousands of viewers saw everything, the laughter, the humiliation, the brutality of the guard, the hypocrisy of the police, and the darkness in which the entire system was dissolving, there was no time to justify it. Protests began to appear. Signature drives, store closures, boycotts. But they could not bring back what had been lost. Those who now knew the whole truth said that they saw their country and society, but too late. While the world was already beginning to argue about how many times it takes to be humiliated for something to change, Harold lay unconscious, and Rex stayed by his side, because in his world there was only one word: loyalty. And that word, spoken once, seemed to have meaning again, but only after a huge price had been paid for every moment of life, for every mistake, for every invisible blow. And in that moment, when the truth burst out, all they could do was look at the fallen hero, realizing that everything could have been different if they had not simply kept silent. Harold was alive, but in the way shadows live. His body could no longer bear the weight he had carried with him through the years. There were no happy faces in the hospital where he was taken after fainting outside the store. People came here not with kind words, but with warnings. The doctors did not say that he would die. They simply said that his heart would not take it. Hour after hour, day after day, his condition worsened. In the morning, when he woke up, it seemed to him that all this was nothing more than another nightmare in which he found himself at the very end of his life. And each new day brought not relief, but despair. There was no fear in his eyes. He simply knew life cannot be like this. He who saved people, who fought for his country, fought with himself, with those who considered him unworthy, with those who laughed and humiliated, without thinking about the consequences. Rex continued to be near. He did not let go of his master. His loyalty was not just an animal instinct. It was what set him apart from all the people who now surrounded him. He did not expect recognition. He did not expect rewards. He was there because he knew that his place was where his master was. Harold often woke up in the middle of the night. Rex was lying next to him, on the floor at his feet. Harold would reach out and gently stroke his head. There were no tears in his eyes. There was only understanding, respect. Death, like life, does not come on a schedule. It does not knock on the door with a warning. It comes when you least expect it. The day Harold opened his eyes, his heart gave out. The doctors rushed to postpone all procedures because he was no longer alive. He was dead, even when his heart was still beating. He'd been dead since the day his face hit the asphalt, and he realized that nothing he had done mattered in this world. His actions became nothing more than another fact to be forgotten. He lay in the hospital, and all he left behind was Rex, who barked again as the doctors left the room. There was no ceremony when his passing was announced. No one remembered him. No one talked about him anymore. Only Rex remained in his memory, the only one who was with him until the very end. Later, when Harold's body was taken to the morgue, many said that they knew how it would end. They said that if he had not stood his ground, if he had not tried to be honest, if he had not fought back, then everything would have been different. But what did that mean? They couldn't say, because their words were empty. When they said they should have done differently, they did not understand that a person cannot exist by someone else's rules. He can only be himself. But to society, Harold was just someone who didn't fit in. Too late to change anything. It was too late for those who could not contain their thirst for respect. It was too late for those who were ready to apologize, but too late to admit that their silence held the greatest shame. When Harold was buried, there was no fanfare around his grave. There were no public words. There were no official statements. It was silent. There were a few people who knew him and loved him, but they were not the ones who could make a difference. Those who saw him fall, who laughed in the crowd, never knew who he really was. They did not understand that someone who served his country, who did not back down despite racism and humiliation, was actually a man. He was a man who was not given a chance. But Rex was there. He sat next to the grave. He did not leave. His paws were on the ground, his gaze fixed on the stone, on the place where his master now lay. Rex could not understand what had happened. All he knew was that he was there, and that moment was enough for him. He didn't know what had changed in the world. He didn't know what had changed in people. He didn't know that the life he'd lost had gone without a trace. But Rex stayed. He stayed where he'd never been appreciated. He stayed in the place where his master had received his last command, to be himself, despite everything that had happened. And though the world hadn't noticed, though Harold's life had gone into the void, his memory remained with those who were there. It remained with those who watched, who were silent, who were afraid, who didn't interfere, who didn't understand. Harold's story was a dark one, a shadow that even those who wanted to forget couldn't erase. But there was at least one living being in the world who could say that this was true friendship. This was real life. And that dog sat by his grave, knowing that their path was not over, that he would keep going despite all those who had betrayed his master. He was the last one standing guard, and his loyalty was stronger than anything else, because even when everything was destroyed, he knew that his master was a true hero. Even if the rest of the world didn't, even if he was gone too soon, his memory remained. Rex was the one who kept remembering. What do you think about this story? Have you ever experienced anything similar in your life? Have you ever experienced racism or bias? Your thoughts and experiences are very important to us, and we appreciate each and every one of you. We are truly grateful for your attention. Subscribe if you like what we do, and don't forget to like to support us. Write in the comments the phrase, "Justice will always prevail," so we know you listened to the end. Have a great day, and thank you for being with us.